It's happening. Countries once seen as rising powers are now on the edge of collapse. Could China's economic bubble finally burst? Will Pakistan's political instability push it over the edge? Or are there surprising nations that no one expects to fall apart? Asia, the world's fastest-growing continent, is facing a crisis like never before. Economic meltdowns, political turmoil, and environmental disasters are pushing these nations to their limits. Some are already showing signs of collapse. Stick with us to uncover which country is on the brink of disaster and who might not survive the coming storm. Number 1. China. For decades, China's rapid economic growth seemed unstoppable. It transformed from an agrarian society into a global manufacturing powerhouse, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. However, cracks are now appearing in its foundation. The real estate sector, which once fueled economic expansion, is now in deep crisis. Major developers like Evergrande and Country Garden have defaulted on massive debts, triggering panic in the financial markets. Property prices are plummeting, and millions of middle-class families who invested their savings in real estate are now seeing their wealth evaporate. Meanwhile, local governments, heavily reliant on land sales for revenue, are struggling to stay afloat, creating a chain reaction of economic distress. Beyond real estate, China's broader economy is losing momentum. Youth unemployment has surged to record levels, with some estimates suggesting nearly 20% of young people are jobless. Foreign investors, once eager to tap into China's vast market, are now pulling back due to strict government regulations, an unpredictable business climate, and increasing geopolitical tensions. The US-China trade war, coupled with sanctions and restrictions on technology exports, is further straining China's growth prospects. Factories that once drove the country's industrial boom are now shifting to countries like Vietnam and India, where labor costs are cheaper and regulations are less restrictive. At the same time, China's political leadership is tightening control, which could further stifle economic recovery. President Xi Jinping's push for greater state intervention in the economy has led to crackdowns on private businesses, big tech, and even education sectors, discouraging entrepreneurship and innovation. Additionally, China's aging population is creating long-term challenges. Fewer workers mean lower productivity and higher social welfare costs. While China remains an economic giant, the warning signs of a looming crisis are undeniable. If these trends continue, the world's second-largest economy could face a downturn unlike anything seen before. The question is, can China navigate these challenges, or are we witnessing the early signs of a historic collapse? Number 2. Pakistan. Pakistan is teetering on the brink of collapse, as both its economy and political system spiral into deeper turmoil. The country's foreign reserves have dwindled to dangerously low levels, barely enough to cover a few weeks of essential imports like fuel and food. Inflation has soared past 38%, pushing the cost of living beyond what many Pakistanis can afford. The Pakistani rupee continues to weaken against the dollar, making debt repayment even more difficult. The government has turned to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for bailouts, but strict economic conditions attached to these loans have led to fuel price hikes, tax increases, and public outrage. Industries are shutting down due to power shortages and rising costs, while unemployment is skyrocketing. These economic struggles have pushed millions below the poverty line, creating a growing sense of desperation across the nation. But Pakistan's crisis isn't just financial, it's deeply political. Over the past few years, the country has witnessed a cycle of unstable leadership, with multiple governments ousted or weakened by military influence and judicial interventions. The 2023 protests, which turned violent in several cities, exposed the fragile state of Pakistan's democracy. political parties are at constant war with each other, while the military, historically a dominant force in governance, continues to play a behind-the-scenes role in shaping national policies. Meanwhile, security concerns are escalating, with extremist groups regaining strength and carrying out attacks in various regions. The combination of economic freefall, political instability, and growing security threats has put Pakistan on a dangerous path. If the country fails to implement critical reforms and restore public confidence, it could face an even more severe crisis, one that threatens its very survival. Number 3. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, once a thriving tourist hotspot, is now grappling with one of the worst economic crises in its history. In 2022, the country made global headlines when it defaulted on its foreign debt of over $83 billion, a shocking first for the island nation. The crisis stemmed from years of financial mismanagement, excessive borrowing, and over-reliance on tourism, which crumbled during the COVID-19 pandemic. Inflation skyrocketed past 50%, sending food, fuel, and medicine prices soaring beyond reach for millions. Fuel stations ran dry, power outages became routine, and the Sri Lankan rupee lost nearly half its value, wiping out savings overnight. With foreign reserves drained, the government turned to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for emergency loans. But the harsh economic conditions attached to these deals have made recovery painfully slow. The political turmoil that followed only made things worse. As economic hardships deepened, mass protests erupted across the country, forcing then-President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee and resign. Yet, even with new leadership, Sri Lanka's road to recovery remains uncertain. Public trust in the government is shattered, and businesses continue to struggle under heavy taxation and weak consumer spending. The country's reliance on China for infrastructure funding has also raised concerns about a debt trap, where loan repayments could further cripple the economy. Without drastic structural reforms and a clear strategy to rebuild investor confidence, Sri Lanka risks sinking deeper into economic despair, leaving its people to bear the brunt of a crisis that shows no signs of ending soon. Number 4. Myanmar. Myanmar is in a state of complete turmoil, with no end in sight. Since the military seized power in a 2021 coup, the country has been plunged into a violent civil war that has devastated its people and economy. Pro-democracy protests were met with brutal crackdowns, leading to thousands of deaths and mass arrests. The situation quickly escalated into an armed resistance, with ethnic rebel groups and civilian militias launching coordinated attacks against the ruling military junta. Entire villages have been burned to the ground, and over 2 million people have been displaced, forced to flee their homes in search of safety. The once thriving cities of Yangon and Mandalay now echo with fear, as bombings, assassinations, and military raids have become an everyday reality. The economic consequences have been just as catastrophic. Before the coup, Myanmar was one of Southeast Asia's fastest-growing economies, attracting foreign investments in industries like manufacturing, tourism, and agriculture. But now, international sanctions have cut off crucial financial support. Foreign businesses have pulled out, and trade has collapsed. The local currency, the kyat, has lost significant value, causing food and fuel prices to skyrocket. Many people can no longer afford basic necessities, and job losses have pushed millions into poverty. The financial system is on the verge of collapse, with banks limiting withdrawals and inflation spiraling out of control. For ordinary citizens, survival has become a daily struggle in a country that seems to be breaking apart. With both sides unwilling to back down, Myanmar's future looks grim. The military junta remains in power despite growing international condemnation, while resistance groups continue to gain ground in some regions. Diplomatic efforts to broker peace have failed, and the country is increasingly isolated on the global stage. If the conflict drags on, Myanmar risks becoming a permanently failed state with no functioning government, a shattered economy, and millions left in despair. The question now is, can Myanmar ever recover, or is it doomed to be another casualty of endless war and dictatorship? Number 5. North Korea. North Korea has long projected an image of strength and control. But behind its tightly sealed borders, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. The country is grappling with one of its worst food crises in decades, with reports of widespread hunger and even starvation becoming more frequent. Decades of economic sanctions have left North Korea with few trade partners, making it nearly impossible to import essential goods. Even China, its closest ally and economic lifeline, has reportedly reduced aid, further isolating the regime. The government's strict control over information means the true scale of the crisis remains hidden from the world. But defectors and intelligence reports suggest that malnutrition is on the rise, black markets are flourishing, and desperation is growing among ordinary citizens. Despite these internal struggles, Kim Jong-un remains fixated on military expansion, diverting scarce resources into nuclear weapons and missile programs instead of feeding his people. The state continues to prioritize propaganda over progress, ensuring that dissent is crushed before it can take root. However, cracks are beginning to show. Smugglers, defectors, and underground networks indicate that dissatisfaction is spreading, even among the elite. If economic conditions worsen and internal dissent gains momentum, could North Korea's iron grip on power finally weaken? The fall of such a secretive and tightly controlled regime would send shockwaves through the world. But for now, the country remains on a knife's edge, struggling to survive while its leader plays a dangerous game of power and isolation. Number 6. Laos. Laos, a country rarely in the global spotlight, is now facing an economic catastrophe that could reshape its future. Over the past few years, its national debt has soared to nearly $15 billion, with much of it owed to China due to large-scale infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. While these investments were meant to boost economic growth, they have instead left Laos trapped in a cycle of debt. Inflation has reached alarming levels, with food and fuel prices doubling in just months, making daily life increasingly unaffordable for ordinary citizens. The Laotian kip has lost significant value, further eroding people's purchasing power and pushing more families into financial distress. The country's dependence on hydroelectric power, once seen as its economic lifeline, has also backfired. While Laos exports energy to neighboring countries, the revenue generated is nowhere near enough to cover its mounting debt. Meanwhile, foreign investors are losing confidence, businesses are struggling to survive, and the government has few options left to stabilize the economy. With limited international support and growing financial strain, Laos is inching closer to a full-blown economic collapse. If urgent measures aren't taken, this hidden crisis could spiral out of control, sending shockwaves across Southeast Asia and leaving millions of Laotians in an even deeper struggle for survival. Number 7. Lebanon. Once celebrated as the Switzerland of the Middle East for its vibrant economy and cultural richness, Lebanon now stands as a stark example of economic and political failure. The financial meltdown that began in 2019 led to the collapse of the banking sector, erasing life savings and thrusting millions into poverty. The Lebanese pound has plummeted, losing over 98% of its value, with the official exchange rate devalued by 90% in early 2023. This devaluation has made basic necessities like food and fuel prohibitively expensive, exacerbating the suffering of the populace. Political corruption and mismanagement have deepened the crisis. The government has struggled to provide essential services, leading to daily power outages lasting hours and increasing food insecurity. Public trust in leadership is at an all-time low, and without urgent and comprehensive reforms, Lebanon faces the risk of complete disintegration. Number 8. Afghanistan. Afghanistan's descent into economic and social turmoil accelerated following the Taliban's return to power in August 2021. The abrupt cessation of foreign aid, which previously constituted a significant portion of the nation's budget, led to a severe contraction of the economy. The United Nations Development Program reported that the Afghan economy lost nearly $5 billion after August 2021, reversing a decade's worth of economic progress in just 12 months. This downturn has plunged over 90% of Afghans below the poverty line, making daily survival a daunting challenge for millions. The Taliban's stringent policies have further exacerbated the crisis. Women have been systematically excluded from public life, facing bans on education, employment, and participation in public spaces. The United Nations has recognized these actions as crimes against humanity. International isolation has deepened, with foreign governments and organizations withdrawing support, leaving Afghanistan to grapple with its challenges in solitude. The combination of economic collapse, social repression, and global isolation has set Afghanistan on a precarious path, with its future hanging in the balance. Number 9. Yemen. Yemen has been embroiled in a devastating conflict since 2014, primarily between Houthi rebels and a Saudi-led coalition supporting the internationally recognized government. This prolonged war has led to one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises. Over 19,000 people have been killed, and millions have been displaced from their homes. Currently, more than 18 million Yemenis, over half the population, require humanitarian assistance, with many on the brink of famine. The healthcare system has collapsed, leaving countless individuals without access to essential medical services. The nation's economy is in shambles, exacerbated by the ongoing conflict and regional tensions. Yemen's GDP is projected to contract by 1% in 2024, following a 2% decline in 2023, highlighting the deepening economic challenges. The war has decimated infrastructure, disrupted basic services, and led to high rates of poverty and unemployment. Despite occasional peace talks, a lasting resolution remains elusive, and the prolonged instability threatens to push Yemen towards becoming a failed state. Number 10. Syria. Syria's prolonged civil war, which began in 2011, has left the nation in a state of profound devastation. The conflict has resulted in over 500,000 deaths and displaced millions, both internally and as refugees abroad. The nation's infrastructure lies in ruins, with cities like Aleppo and Homs bearing the scars of relentless bombardment. The economy has been decimated, leading to widespread unemployment and poverty. The Syrian pound has lost significant value, causing hyperinflation and making basic necessities unaffordable for many. Despite the fall of the Assad regime in late 2024, the country remains fragmented, with various factions vying for control. The new leadership faces the monumental task of rebuilding amidst ongoing instability and external pressures. The humanitarian crisis persists, with over 80% of the population living below the poverty line. Access to essential services such as healthcare, clean water, and electricity is limited, exacerbating the suffering of the Syrian people. International sanctions, while aimed at the previous regime, continue to hinder economic recovery and the delivery of aid. The path to reconstruction is fraught with challenges, including demining vast areas, restoring basic infrastructure, and fostering political reconciliation among diverse groups. Without significant international support and a comprehensive peace plan, Syria risks becoming a permanently failed state, unable to provide for its citizens or maintain territorial integrity. The collapse of these nations isn't just a possibility, it's already happening. Some are sinking under economic debt, others are tearing apart from political instability, and a few are trapped in never-ending wars. The next few years will determine which of these countries can recover, and which will disappear from the world stage as we know it. What do you think? Will China really collapse? Or is another country on this list doomed to fall first? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more eye-opening content from Discovering the Earth. See you in the next video.